I've been using the Pimax Crystal for around 4 months now and have given quite a lot of opinions of the headset in various videos over that time, and while I think the Crystal is giving me literally the best VR experience I've ever had in titles such as Elite Dangerous, Project Cars 2 and Microsoft Flight Simulator, there are certain frustrations I struggle with. I wonder if there's an alternate universe where Pimax made a Crystal headset without the additional feature of an all-in-one standalone mode, which would remove the requirement for that XR2 chip, which in turn would remove the need for the battery to be constantly attached to the headset, which further to this would reduce the cost, weight and potentially even reduce the form factor of the headset itself. I wonder if in that universe Pimax focused on creating the very best PC VR headset, especially for sim gaming, and strived to really push that with constant attention to detail, because that's the Pimax Crystal I really want if truth be told. But before I get into this review, I want to make it clear that I absolutely love the Crystal for certain PC VR titles, and I only mention that here at the beginning because some of what I say in this review might make you question that at times. But there's a lot to say on this headset, and I'm going to try to make this review as concise and to the point as possible, focusing on aspects I think are most important rather than focusing on an exhaustive list. So let's get into it.
Immersed robot.
So one of the main points which gives this headset a significant advantage over many others on the market currently are those incredible visuals. Those dual 2880 by 2880 displays with local dimming paired with aspheric lenses give an image quality in VR which is probably the best I've ever experienced, pushing the resolution up to 100% in aircar and experiencing barely any noticeable pixels, along with vibrant colours, deep blacks and edge-to-edge clarity is something that remains an incredible experience. I can see minimal geometric distortions with those lenses, and apart from some chromatic aberration in places, I find it difficult to really fault the visuals in the Crystal overall. Now there is a small anomaly on this point, and that is to do with the focal distance in this headset compared to others. Usually VR headsets will aim for a focal distance of anywhere between 2 or 3 meters, but the Pimax Crystal, to the best of what I can find anyway, is around 1 meter. Now speaking personally, this created absolutely no issues for me, but depending on the person and differences in near field sight, it could potentially cause some problems for certain people, so it's something to bear in mind at least. Now, the other feature closely associated with the visual clarity in the Crystal is the integrated Tobii eye tracking, which allows for dynamic foveated rendering or DFR, allowing certain games to render full resolution only in the specific areas of the display you're focusing on at any one time in order to improve performance. In the games which utilise this feature either natively like Elite Dangerous or through OpenXR toolkit integrations such as Microsoft Flight Simulator, it can offer anywhere between 10 to 30% improvement in performance, at least from what I've tested so far. This can help improve frame rate in some of the most demanding games, especially on PCs which might have less than a top tier GPU. And this leads me on to my next point when using this headset for PC VR, and something I've been called out on for not making clear in my previous videos, but it's something I want to get into here, and that is what kind of GPU do you need to run this headset? I've been running the Pimax Crystal on an RTX 3080 base system. My full PC specs are in the description, but I would actually consider this spec GPU to be the absolute minimum anybody should even consider when pairing it with the Crystal. By making compromises in certain areas, the Crystal will function on lower performing GPUs, but there comes a point where you're not really gaining any significant benefit from getting a headset with such a high resolution display. Elite Dangerous on my RTX 3080 at 70% resolution scaling in SteamVR with eye tracking and dynamic foveated rendering enabled gives me a level of clarity and overall performance I've never previously experienced in a VR headset. That's not to say reprojection won't be required in places, but for the most part it runs great. But there's that compromise, 70% resolution scaling. Why not 100%? Well, we probably all know the reason for that, and that's simply because my PC isn't able to push things too much higher while maintaining a native 90 frames per second. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a struggle on the Pimax Crystal for me, but honestly it's a struggle for everyone. The problem is that while the Crystal is giving me the best experience in Microsoft Flight Simulator I've had on my PC, the improvements over something like a Reverb G2 are diminished simply because I have to scale back resolution and in-game settings in order to get a reasonable frame rate even with DFR enabled. Even on a 4090, the Pimax Crystal's native resolution and higher in-game settings will start to bring you to a point where frame rate simply cannot be maintained. The point is that for certain titles the compromises become too much to put up with, and the benefit of this $1,600 headset suddenly becomes less significant when subsampling the resolution sufficiently in order to get the required frame rate. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator is the extreme example of this, and like I've mentioned, it will still offer the best overall visuals I've seen even on my now very mid-range 3080 GPU. But plenty of other titles are certainly more accommodating. As mentioned, Elite Dangerous is probably my favourite game to play on the Crystal, and it looks incredible even at that 70%. Project Cars 2 is very similar, and of course Half-Life Alyx looks and runs fantastic. But the point I want to make is that the higher GPU you can run in conjunction with a Crystal, then of course the better overall experience you'll have. There's always a temptation to think that the current generation's highest tier GPU at the moment of 4090 will solve all of your problems, but quite honestly I'm not even sure if a 5090 will be able to get you to a level of performance which will allow the Crystal to run at native resolution 120 frames per second locked with ultra settings. Compromises always have to be made at some level. I've always tried to make it perfectly clear in my previous videos what kind of experience you can expect when using a 3080 with a Crystal by showing on screen frame rate and resolution scaling information in a majority of my videos. This is as transparent as I can be in showing you what you might expect from the Crystal experience. But getting on to another point, the audio quality in the Pimax Crystal with the KD Mass headphones is fantastic, and perhaps only slightly lower than the Valve Index audio, which remains my favourite integrated audio solution overall in any VR headset. There is, however, some noticeable audio latency, which I hope will be resolved in a future update. I actually generally didn't notice this, but when playing 11 table tennis VR, the pop of the ball bouncing on the table is delayed by an irritating amount, honestly. So that's something to keep in mind with this headset, but hopefully that will be patched at some point. The microphone in the Crystal is fantastic, and although I do get some popping occasionally, I like the audio from this in general. Now just a quick word on form factor. The Crystal is large, bulky and heavy. I really dislike this aspect of the headset, and I really hope form factor is a major focus of future Pimax headsets. But there is a difference between bulk and weight and overall comfort, and personally I've used the Crystal for over 2 hours and probably getting close to 3 hours in a single session, and I can honestly say comfort is not a major issue for me in spite of the bulk and the weight. However, in a world where we see the industry trying to rapidly reduce the size of VR headsets, the Crystal is beginning to stand out like a sore thumb. Seated gaming is fine, but I really have to push myself to want to play any of the more active VR games while using the Crystal, and in fact I've given up bothering. The form factor might be a necessary byproduct of the technology included, but that was easier to believe in something like the 8KX, which offered an ultra wide field of view. In this headset it feels less of a necessity and more of a manufacturing convenience. The Crystal comes with inside-out tracking and tracked motion controllers as standard, with the option to purchase a SteamVR Lighthouse faceplate as an extra. The inside-out tracking on the headset has never presented me with any huge issues in my 4 months of use, and the controllers generally track adequately. I've had little to no issues in tracking for general gaming such as Half-Life Alyx, Space Pirate Trainer or the Resident Evil 7 VR mod, but they do show their limitations in something like 11 table tennis. They just didn't seem to feel quite so snappy for me in that title, and while certainly playable, it didn't really compel me to continue using them, especially when combined with that audio latency. But when using the SteamVR Lighthouse faceplate in conjunction with the base stations and some of the Pimax sword controllers sent to me for review purposes, I can say that the tracking quality on the motion felt much better. 11 table tennis suddenly became a much more enjoyable experience. Not that I would generally recommend the sword controllers due to the lack of a thumbstick, but index controllers could also certainly be used in this scenario. Truth be told, for my primary use cases with the Crystal, which are really sort of seated sim-based titles, I often find myself just reverting to the standard inside-out tracking of the HMD out of convenience, and it honestly works extremely well for those use cases. Now onto the software, and this is perhaps where things begin to get frustrating, although not anything like previous Pimax headsets I've used. For most of the first 2 months of using the Crystal, I was testing beta software which featured eye tracking and dynamic foveated rendering. During this time I had an almost flawless experience with the Pimax Play software. The headset would connect first time when turning it on without fail, firmware updates would be effortlessly applied, and the software itself was running perfectly on my PC. However, shortly before the general release of the full-featured software, and while getting various updates, I began to notice the headset not always connecting first time, or to put it more accurately, it would connect and disconnect several times before finally working. The same would happen when altering refresh rates, or anything which meant the software needed to be restarted. This started to get incredibly frustrating, especially when I had a flawless experience in the beta test. Further to this, the headset wouldn't turn off in the way it had always done before. I would shut it down and it would immediately turn on again and try to reconnect, only removing the battery would prevent it from doing so. This seems to have been resolved for the most part, although it's still done it a handful of times even after several updates. And this is the main issue, I'm never sure what state the HMD's performance will be after a major software or firmware update. This makes reviewing this headset a constant moving target and an almost impossible task, which is part of the reason I've held off for so long before even attempting it. This lack of focus and attention to detail in certain aspects of the Pimax Crystal is what makes a headset I still absolutely love a constant battle of frustration, and it's something that even now I can only recommend for people who don't mind a level of tinkering, altering settings, and perhaps being resigned to the fact that occasionally some things will break with the headset, or at least go through periods of not working as well as they once did. And let me just reiterate, I absolutely love the Pimax Crystal for specific PC VR titles, and it gives me the best overall experience I've had in a handful of PC VR titles which I play the most. But let's get on to my final section in this review, a general direction for this product and that all-in-one standalone mode. Pimax have created a superb VR headset for PC sim-based titles, and there is no other headset I've ever used which gives me this level of immersion in Elite Dangerous, probably my favourite VR title ever. But for some reason, Pimax feel the need to pack the spec sheets of all of their headsets with every single fashionable, trending piece of VR related tech. Sometimes this can be of huge benefit, such as the Tobii eye tracking, but sometimes it can simply get in the way and be an overall detriment to an otherwise outstanding device, and that's what the standalone mode with the XR2 chip and that battery is to me. Even when tethered to a PC, the battery drains, and while not a huge issue for me personally, it's a baffling and frustrating annoyance which raises its head every once in a while. The simple fact is I have zero interest in that standalone mode on this HMD, and when I've tried it, it's been a less than compelling experience. Do people who are going to pick up this headset really even want this standalone mode at all? Well, of course, I'll probably now receive comments saying that numerous people have picked up this headset because they want a great PC VR headset with the standalone function as a brilliant value add. Now, I'd argue that rather it being a value add, the standalone mode of the Crystal is simply an added cost, and something else Pimax can extraneously put on the spec sheet. Pimax had the opportunity to create an incredible sim gaming PC VR headset, plain and simple, with focus and attention to detail. It could have done this task remarkably well, and by not including the XR2 chip, battery, or any other associated hardware, it could have seriously dominated this niche at a much lower cost. What they've done is created a device that tries to please everyone to the detriment of expense and perhaps even form factor. It's like the saying, a jack of all trades but master of none, but that's not true in the Crystal's case. It is a master of PC VR sim gaming. Now, I'm just giving my opinion here, and I'm sure there are plenty of Crystal owners out there who won't agree with me on this point at all, and I can fully accept my opinion won't be one shared by everyone. But what the hell, this is my review, so I'm going to be as honest as I can about my own thoughts. So bear with me while I give an idea of what my dream Pimax Crystal would be, and honestly it's more or less what we've got, but it's one which forgoes the standalone mode altogether, removes the unnecessary hardware that brings with it, and it's one which has a drastically reduced form factor. I don't need a big screen beyond type of device, but something close to the general direction the industry is moving in. Playing active games in the Crystal feels borderline ridiculous, with the inertia as you rapidly move your head pulling on the headset in various ways. Now, I don't care how I look when I'm playing VR, but I also don't want a huge cumbersome box strapped to my face while lunging or dodging in a fast-paced shooter. The truth is, I'm being far more critical in this review than I ever intended, but that's really only because I genuinely do love this headset for the application it is ideally suited for: PC VR, sim gaming, and that's just how I feel about it. It feels like a wasted opportunity to really silence all those Pimax haters whose criticism rings in the ears of every potential buyer. I'm not a Pimax hater, but I also don't want to ignore every confusing decision that seems to go into them trying to squeeze everything into every product they release, even if it has a net detrimental effect. So I'll close it here. The Pimax Crystal offers the pinnacle of visuals in a PC VR product in late 2023. The high resolution, vivid colours, deep blacks through local dimming, coupled with the sometimes invaluable dynamic foveated rendering thanks to the integrated Tobii eye tracking, the fantastic integrated audio and microphone. It does so many things well that in certain aspects it's actually really easy to recommend, especially when coupled with a suitably high-end GPU. The frustrations I have really revolve around what I would consider mostly unnecessary additions at an unnecessary added expense, which a few people might get a genuine benefit from. I'd almost suggest that a separate version of the Crystal would be the solution, one focused on PC VR and completely removing the standalone aspect, but I don't really want to encourage Pimax to further expand their already confusing product line at this stage. I'll continue to use the moving target that is the Pimax Crystal, and I'm sure I'll continue to enjoy the fantastic experience it offers in the specific titles that most draw me in. I wish I could have been entirely positive in this review, but let me leave you with this. In the 7 years I've been using VR, there have only been a handful of moments that have matched that initial wow factor of going into my HTC Vive for the first time back in 2016. And sitting here right now, the main one that stands out to me is flying around in the tech demo air car. A small experience, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, with little interaction and only a futuristic city to cruise around and observe. But being able to run the Pimax Crystal at its full potential in that experience, full resolution, 90 frames per second, and with fantastic looking colours is one of those moments that sticks with me. It's a standout moment in a flawed but still incredible headset. But that's it. Thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you next time. Best thing, look at that. This is unbelievable. Honestly, this is just absolutely one of the best little VR experiences I've ever played.